What are we discussing on today's podcast, you ask? Well, we got to talk about that Dbacks comeback victory over the New York Mets and check in on where they are in the standings. And then I want to do a little fun topic, power ranking the most lethal teams in the wild card, either the teams that can knock out the Dbacks from the race or the teams that we might have to face in a potential wild card series, the scariest teams, in my opinion. Discussing all that on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day listening to the always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, MillardThomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube, so please hit subscribe on the Locked On Diamondbacks YouTube channel. And don't forget, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now let's get into this podcast, and let's first start off with that Dbacks victory over the New York Mets, because this was a pretty back and forth game between these two teams. Zach Davies was all right in this game. He wasn't terrible. 3 earned runs over 4 innings pitched. Like, it was a pretty typical Zach Davies start, but what was really impressive was the bullpen that came out after that. Kyle Nelson, 2 shutdown innings. Luis Frias even, he has been he's got 4.64 ERA on the season, but I feel like since he's gotten called up recently, he's been fine. They got Kevin Ginkel out there, who of course is always nasty. 2 big strikeouts in the 8th inning. And then Paul Sewald. He's kind of like this year's version of Mark Melancon or let me not just say, he's got some Mark Melancon tendencies in him, because the difference between Mark Melancon and Paul Sewald is Paul Sewald actually gets the save. I say Sewald has some Mark Melancon tendencies because if you remember Melancon, it was always like, let's give a double up to the first batter, or let's start the inning by walking the first 2 batters. And Paul Sewald gave up 2 walks. At one point, it was 2nd and 3rd. One swing of the bat could win the game for the New York Mets, but Sewald was able to get out the jam. Was it the prettiest? No. He makes us a little nervous at times, a little anxious, but at least Sewald was able to shut the door. And that's what he was traded for in that deal with the Seattle Mariners. Because Mariners fans, listen, they are happy with the return that they got back from the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think Dominic Canzone is all of a sudden move out Julio Rodriguez. It's either Julio's jerseys or Dominic Canzone's jerseys right now flying off the shelves. Josh Rojas has also looked a little bit better, looked a little bit more confident as well with the Seattle Mariners. So they have been happy with their side of the package. I think D-backs fans, it's been a little up and down with Paul Sewald, but overall, I am happy with what I've seen. He has been able to nail down more than his fair share of saves, already with the D-backs. He has 12 saves now in 16 games. That's pretty crazy. 12 saves and 13 save opportunities or 14 save opportunities. So it's as much as you want to say, yeah, it's been a little up and down with Paul Sewald, this man already has double-digit saves in, the 15 games he's played. So if you extrapolate over the course of a full season, Paul Sewald would have 75 saves for the D-backs this season. Every win that the D-backs have this year, all 76 of them, Paul Sewald might have saved if he was the closer from day one. So do love the fact they shut down. And then you look at the offense. It wasn't great. It wasn't pretty. You did get 10 hits tonight, but only 1 for 5 around in scoring position. But you came through when it matters most in that 8th inning. Tommy Pham, who has been really clutch for the D-backs, I want to say, the last 3.5 weeks, there's many games you could point to where Tommy Pham had a big hit late, in the extra innings. I remember there was a game where Tommy Pham came through in extras. He had that one game. I can't remember the opponents right now, but he had a game in the last 3 weeks where he had a RBI in extra innings. He had another 2 home run game in one of the recent series as well. I'm blanking on the opponents right now, but Tommy Pham has been really crushing it for the D-backs and has been really coming through in critical moments of the game. It feels like every Tommy Pham hit is a big hit, a momentous hit. And so far, doing this against the New York Mets, against his former team, Tommy Pham has been really good. Like the D-backs trade deadline, once again, I think has been good. Was it a superstar deadline? Did you get a Juan Soto? No. But you got a closer, which was your biggest issue, arguably. And you did upgrade right field with a Tommy Pham who has been solid. Alek Thomas all of a sudden has been playing really well. And then if you want, Jake McCarthy, it just freaking raking in the minors. He's winning MVPs down there, Player of the Week awards. Like Jake McCarthy is going to end the season and be MVP of the AAA baseball league because of how well he crushes AAA pitching. But the offense came through just enough, came through late, offense clutch. Tommy Pham, 8th inning solo home run. Ketel Marte, 9th inning, double down the line. Then Paul Sewall closes the door. D-backs 76 and 69 on the year. And now you look at the standings. Where do I have the standings? Here they are. D-backs are now a game and a half on the Miami Marlins for that third wild card spot because the Marlins lost tonight 12-0 to the Milwaukee Brewers, if you could believe that. So that gives them just a little bit of cushion there. Cubs still 2 games ahead of the D-backs as they took a victory tonight. D-backs in game 2 against the New York Mets should be feeling, we'll see what happens. I don't know too much about the Mets guy, but just the peripherals, 3.86 ERA, just a handful. Let me look at his stats real quick. I'm just reading what the MLB.com probable pitcher says. Because the pitcher tomorrow only has 3 starts on the year for the New York Mets, 25 years old, 3.86 ERA over 21 innings pitched. So rookie, inexperienced, that could be something that the D-backs take advantage of, but also we don't know what he looks like. So maybe that could be in the advantage of the New York Mets. And for the D-backs, Ryan Nelson on the mound, who, I mean, he's a flip of the coin, right? Ryan Nelson can either give up 6 earned runs with 2 home runs allowed over the course of 3.5 innings, or Ryan Nelson, like we did in his last start, 5.2 innings pitched, 2 hits, 1 earned run. Ryan Nelson can both be efficient and electric, and also just give up a ton of hard contact, and you scream and you want to pull your hair out. So which Ryan Nelson will get in game 2, we'll see. But even if he doesn't come through in game 2, D-backs are still pretty set up the rest of the series. Zach Gallen game 3, Merrill Kelly in game 4. Obviously, you don't want to sit on your laurels. Obviously, you want every victory possible, but at least you feel confident going in game 3 and game 4 if Ryan Nelson can't get it done in game 2. But D-backs are sitting pretty nice right now in these MLB standings. Wild card, of course, every day is tight. It's changing and shifting every day. And we're going to be breaking down the teams I think are the scariest and the most lethal in this NL wildcard race, either through the perspective of knocking out the D-backs in the playoffs or knocking them out for the opportunity to make it to the postseason. But great victory by the D-backs. Once again, the D-backs have shown their resilience in this game. There was a brief time period there. Okay, let me take that back. It wasn't brief. It was like a 2-month stretch from mid-June to mid-August where the D-backs just look lifeless. They were one of the worst teams in baseball. And the one thing that they were not coming back is they were not coming back late in games. This D-backs team, the first half of the season, were the comeback kids. That 2-month stretch from mid-June to mid-August, they were terrible. That was the one thing that they could not do anymore was come back on opponents. It felt like if opponents took early leads, even if it was like 2 or 3 runs, it felt like this D-backs team were just going to roll over. But over the last month, things have changed. Things have shifted. We have seen the D-backs play with some passion, some heart, and some joy once again. It's been very nice to see, and hopefully the D-backs can keep the momentum going through the rest of the series and through the rest of the season. Now I want to talk about my power ranking of NL wildcard teams, but before we get there, I first want to talk to our listeners about a little app called Game Time, because let me get the overlay up real quick. If you need tickets, last minute tickets, that is, to any event sporting, sporting, football, basketball, baseball, whether it's entertainment, concerts, comedy, theater, and more, Game Time is the place for last minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on events right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football and all the other events that I just mentioned, all the sports, all the comedy, all the entertainment, and the game time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find the tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And don't forget to catch every D-backs pitch on their hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. Now let's get back into the D-backs podcast and let's do this fun little exercise that I came up with because I don't know. I just came up with this idea of who are the scariest teams actually in the wild card race, not counting the D-backs. Who are the teams I would be the most afraid of if the D-backs had to face them in the wild card series, or who are the teams I'm most afraid of could keep the D-backs out of postseason contention overall? And really, we're going to keep this to 5 teams in the wild card race, right? Like, I love Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres, but the Padres are 8.5 games back. We're not going to include them. On this. We're going to talk about the Phillies, the Cubs, the Marlins, the Giants, and the Reds. Those 5 teams. And number 1 in my power ranking of the team that I'm most scared of is the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, maybe this seems kind of obvious because the Phillies are the number 1 seed in the wild card race right now. And that's because they are the scariest team in this wild card race, I believe, in my opinion. And if the D-backs had to face them for a litany of reasons, that is, the first reason is because let's just get the monkey out the way. This Phillies team, is that even a good phrase to say? This Phillies team is the reigning National League champion. We know the potential of this Philadelphia Phillies squad because we just saw it in the postseason a year ago. When this team is clicking on all cylinders, they have a ceiling of World Series contention. And I don't know the best version of the D-backs. I want to hope it could be runner-up in the World Series, but at least for the Phillies, I know if everything is clicking for them, their best version is the World Series. If the Nolas and the Wheelers are dealing, the Harpers and the Schwarbers and the Turners are crushing at the plate, this team, with how many pieces that they have in their lineup, with how much money they got committed to this payroll, it's not a surprise to see that this Phillies team is number 1 in this wild card power ranking because they probably committed more resources than any other team that I'm going to be talking about today. The Cubs, the D-backs, the Marlins, Giants, and Reds. The Phillies definitely have the most pot committed, so it's not a surprise to see that they're also the most lethal and deadly team. I know Bryce Harper hasn't looked like the same player this year because, listen, he is coming off Tommy John surgery. He started the season way earlier than I even expected, and he's still having a good year. He's still having an all-star level year. He's just not having a Bryce Harper MVP level season. But even with that being said, Bryce Harper is a guy who I am not writing off once I get to the postseason. That's a guy who I just know when the game is the most pressurized, when the lights are the brightest, he just seems like someone that gets energized and gets fueled by those moments. And because of that, I am not going to write off Bryce Harper in a playoff scenario. We saw him last season almost single-handedly carry that team through the World Series. And if the D-backs got him in a short wild card series, Bryce Harper could be single-handedly the reason that the D-backs get bounced in the postseason. And Bryce Harper is only 30 years old. This guy's been in baseball like 15 years, it feels like, only 30 years old. So just the Bryce Harper effect is like a secondary reason why you can't write off this Philadelphia Phillies team and why I have to be so scared of them. And also, how about the fact that this Phillies team, if you compare it to last year's team, you could say it's more talented. Like, they did add Trey Turner, one of the best shortstops in Major League Baseball this season. I know Turner's not having a fantastic season, but even so, 266 average, 782 OPS, 24 home runs, 26 stolen bases. Like, he's still going to put up a whole bunch of counting stats. He still has, what's his OPS plus? 112. Like, Trey Turner is still someone that you have to fear at the plate. He's still someone that's a difference maker, running the bases, still got incredible speed, still got incredible bat to ball skills. Like, Trey Turner is still someone I fear as an offense player. And I still don't think it's probably never a good idea to hand out a double digit, decade-long contract, but still Trey Turner, the first 5 or 6 years of the deal, I think it's still going to be a superstar. Then also Bryson Stott, second year with the Philadelphia Phillies, has looked really good this year. 290 average, 771 OPS, 14 home runs, 28 stolen bases at the time of me recording this. Bryson Stott also having a very fantastic season. So I just think this Phillies team is probably a little bit more loaded than what they were last year. I know Aaron Nola's not having a great season, and if I had to pick a weakness of this Phillies team, it's probably maybe the frontline duo, because Aaron Nola, for some weird reason, like every other year, he's good, and this is one of his down years. Not exactly great this season. Wheeler, I think, is better than what the peripherals show, but still not exactly a elite Wheeler season. So maybe that rotation is a little susceptible. But even with that being said, in terms of ERA, this Phillies pitching staff in the National League is top 5 in bullpen, and either rotation ERA or pitching staff ERA. I'm not quite sure, but definitely top 5 in bullpen ERA. And they're 4th in runs as well. So from an offensive perspective and a pitching perspective, this Philadelphia Phillies team is pretty balanced overall. So that's why they're the scariest team to me in this postseason mix. But the second team might kind of surprise you, because I'm not just going chalk straight down the board. The second team is the Miami Marlins. I think they are scarier than the Chicago Cubs, because I talked about it on the podcast with Sully Baseball the other day. I don't want to sleep on what they did at the MLB trade deadline, because we always talk about this Marlins team, even entering the season. It's like this team can be a borderline World Series contender, a true playoff contender with that rotation. The only issue is, can they score enough runs? And you look at their team right now. Luis Arias came in, fantastic trade, win-win on both sides. He's been really good this season. Jazz Chisholm, when he's not injured, really productive major leaguer. Jorge Soler has near 40 home runs. He's been good this year. And Jesus Sanchez has also had a little bit of a bounce back. So you got those offensive players doing work for you in your lineup. And then at the deadline, you traded for Jake Berger, who I admittedly did not know a lot about, but at the time of me recording this podcast, 6 home runs, 295 average, 849 OPS in 35 games with the Marlins. And then Josh Bell, another 850 OPS plus guy with 9 home runs as well in 35 games with the Marlins. Both of those guys have been really fantastic since being called over. You look at that rotation too for Miami, very young, very hungry. Sandy Alcantara is, of course, not having the Cy Young Award season that he had last year. But even with that being said, he's still a very good pitcher and can turn it up potentially in the postseason. But even if he doesn't, Jesus Luzardo, Braxton Garrett, and Yuri Perez are all really good behind him. And Edward Cabrera, he hasn't been great recently, but I like the potential and talent of him as well. So that rotation is young. Now, does it lack experience? Yeah, that's where you could probably... That's probably the weakness of this Miami Marlins team, is the lack of experience, because they are pretty young, especially in that rotation. But in terms of talent, I like the depth now in their lineup. I love their rotational depth. Yeah, their bullpen might be a little bit of a question mark, but with how young and talented that Miami Marlins team is, I got them second in my lethal NL wildcard power rankings. Now we're going to continue my power rankings with the other 3 teams. But before we get there, I first want to talk to you guys about this app that I use heavily during the football season called Sleeper, because the MLB playoffs are around the corner, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to get 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is now, with studs like Acuna, Betts, and Ohtani. Pick stats for these stars like home runs, hits, and strikeouts. And if you get it right, you can get up to 100 times payout on Sleeper. So why wouldn't you do this? All you have to do is download the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDON, and you can get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And it's also great for the football season, because I use Sleeper for my Dynasty Football League. It archives my players from year to year. You can do the rookie draft on there as well. So Sleeper, daily fantasy baseball, you want to win money. Daily fantasy football, you can win money as well. Or you could just use it for regular fantasy sports. Sleeper is truly the end-all, be-all when it comes to sports apps. So download the Sleeper app, use code LOCKEDON, get that $100 match. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Go download the Sleeper app now. And don't forget to catch every Dbacks pitch on their hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. Felt like I was getting a little drunk during that slippery just now. My speech was slurring. I felt like it was a little bit of a tongue twister there. But let's get back into the podcast now. Power rank the rest of the teams I'm most scared of in this NL wildcard race. Next up is the Chicago Cubs. So now we're back to chalk. And the Cubs, surprisingly, best run differential of the teams we're going to mention today in this wildcard race. The Cubs are now plus 99 after their victory today. The Cubs have been on a roll post MLB trade deadline, and they are a good baseball team. Let's not get, let's not mince any words. They are third in runs scored in the National League, which seems kind of crazy because on paper, this Cubs team, I think, is solid when you look at some of their players in their lineup. But am I scared of their lineup? No, I'm scared of Cody Bellinger because we know that dude has MVP talent and he looks like he's back to being an MVP. But outside of him, there's some guys who I think are solid and are good. Like I think the Seiya Suzuki's are good, but I'm not scared of him. I think Christopher Morel is good. I'm not scared of Morel. Nico Hoerner, he's solid. He's a little speedster. I'm not scared of Nico Hoerner. Dansby, Ian Happ, I'm not scared of them, but the lineup is solid. It's good. It's filled with quality major leaguers. Excuse me. And when I look at the Chicago Cubs, like, I think their lineup is good enough to score runs. I think their Candelario pickup was very nice. I'm just not like terrified of their lineup. I just think Cody Bellinger is the only star player that I would fear, but I think at least their lineup is deep and there's not a lot of that. I think their lineup has a high floor at the very least. I may not think it has a high ceiling, but they go at least 6-7 deep with quality major leaguers, which is always very impressive. And then their rotation also very strong. Their rotation is just like their lineup. Like there's no one that truly scares me in the rotation. There's no one that's like a Justin Verlander in his prime, a Clayton Kershaw in his prime, even though Kershaw doesn't scare anyone in the postseason. But there's no one like that in their rotation. Justin Steele might win a Cy Young Award this season, but I'm not fearful of Justin Steele. Marcus Stroman has had, he's had a pretty good season, but I'm not scared of Marcus Stroman. Javier Assad has been a nice revelation for them in their rotation as well. But this is just a really well-balanced team, the Chicago Cubs team, from their rotation to their bullpen to their lineup. Not a lot of superstars, but are they well-balanced? Do they have above average talent at a lot of positions? Yeah, that's why they're third in my wild card lethality power rankings. Number 4, it's just going to be chalk. Yes, the rest of this, but number 4 and number 5 was splitting hairs because these two teams are currently tied in the race with the Giants having the tiebreaker, and the Giants also got the tiebreaker for the number 4 spot in my power ranking. So truly, the only thing that I had different from the standings was switching the Marlins and Cubs, but I at least wanted you guys to get my thoughts as to why I think the power ranking is so similar to the standings and why I kind of agree with what the standings say, which is, it should be accurate, right? The best teams, it should go in the order of, what am I trying to say there? The standings should go in the order of the best teams, typically, right? That's how you want it to be. If everyone's healthy, it should be in the order of the best teams. And right now, I think the NL wildcard is stacking up just like that outside of the Marlins and Chicago Cubs. But maybe that's a hot take by me. But the Giants, I think, are definitely the 4th best team. And it was actually super close. I think on paper, you can actually say this Reds team is better than the Giants. That's what I actually believe. I actually think the Reds are a better team than the Giants. But for the Dbacks specifically, who is a worse opponent for the Dbacks? I think it's the San Francisco Giants. It's a matchup thing because NL West rival, interdivisional thing. I think that's huge. I think actually seeing a team more times than like any other, opponent outside of your division, like it means a lot. Like you guys know each other's tendencies more. You see each other's pitching staffs more. You see each other's opposing batters more. You just know more about each other. And then also, what did you think about the head-to-head matchups this season? I just think the D-backs have played the Cincinnati Reds better than the San Francisco Giants, even though both those teams own the tiebreaker over the D-backs. I like how the D-backs have looked against the Reds recently, but the D-backs do have one more series against the Giants this year, so maybe that'll flip and the D-backs can take back that tiebreaker. But I just look at this Giants lineup. It's kind of old, not really super scary, not very dynamic. That's really the thing with the Giants lineup. Like, you look at the D-backs lineup and you're like, whoa, speedsters all around, youth and athleticism all around. D-backs can create chaos on the base paths, but for this San Francisco, I am starting to lose my speech here, but for the San Francisco Giants team, Tyro Estrada is having a good season. Lamont Wade Jr. has been good this season. But you look at all these batters like the Confortos and the J.D. Daversons and the Jock Petersons, like none of these guys are really scaring you at all. No one's really having a fantastic season for the Giants this year. Wilmer Flores is probably their best player right now. So who am I really scared of in that Giants lineup? I really don't think it's anybody. They have a bunch of names we know. They have a bunch of quality major leaguers, but I think the ceiling of like a Reds and Cubs lineup is higher. And the rotation, I will say, is better than the Cincinnati Reds. Logan Webb, Alex Cobb, solid frontline duo. Logan Webb, legit stud. And then the bullpen of the Giants is really good as well. Just that lineup is just not scary at all. And I would not be that afraid of the Giants in the postseason. That's why they're number 4. I just think they're scarier than the Reds because of playing them so often in the division. But for the Reds, like, they're, I think, a better team than the Giants. The lineup scares me more than the Giants. The only thing is they lack experience in both that lineup and rotation because they are just loaded on rookies and youngsters. And also the rotation for the Reds just isn't that strong. So that's why I have to put them at number 5 for who I'm scared of most. But if you told me the Reds, knocked the D-backs out in the postseason, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. Like, you got Ella De La Cruz, you got Matt McLean, you got Will Benson. Like, there's a lot of studs in that rotation. If Andrew Abbott and Graham Ashcraft also pitch pretty well in the postseason, like, yeah, there is a world where the Reds could knock out the D-backs in a potential postseason series. And I just think this D-backs team, as it currently stands, of all the teams I just mentioned, I think the only team that could really knock out and put some fear into this D-backs team is the Phillies because of all the studs, all the stars that they actually have on Diamond, all the big-time, high-paid players that they have. They're the only team that could probably, big dog the D-backs a little bit more. Oh my God, I am falling apart at the end of this podcast. The Phillies are probably the only team that could big dog this D-backs team a little bit because they have more experience. They got a whole lot of highly paid stars, right? So it's like if any team could big brother the D-backs, it's probably the Phillies. But outside of that, the Marlins, with their lack of experience and all their youngsters, like, they're super talented, but D-backs should be scared of them. The Cubs, outside of Cody Bellinger, I'm not scared of it. They don't really have any stars outside of Cody Bellinger. They have a lot of really good pieces, but just like the Marlins, I shouldn't really be scared of anybody in that rotation or lineup. Same with the Giants, same with the Cincinnati Reds. I think the Phillies are the only team that would actually genuinely scare me in a postseason setting. I'm not saying any of the other teams couldn't knock out the D-backs. I'm just saying the only team that would be like nervous for in a postseason setting would be the Philadelphia Phillies. And that's why they're number 1 in my power ranking for most lethal NL wildcard teams. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. For your second listen of the day, check out the Locked On MLB podcast with host Sully Baseball. Don't forget to catch every D-backs pitch on the hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.